One time, there was a teenager who was debating abortion with my friend Stephanie Gray. And the teenager said to Steph, she said, look, if you have a baby in one hand on the feet and a fetus in the other, you obviously choose the baby. So the point is that the fetus is more dependent on the mother. So if you have to choose, we always prioritize the baby and the mother. So Stephanie started thinking about this. And she started realizing, I think what this girl is saying is, if you have a choice between saving someone who is strong and someone who is weak, you always choose to save the strong person. So Stephanie thinks, she says to this girl, she says, you know what? What you just said reminds me of something I read on Facebook. There was a picture and the caption said, my husband is a hero. So what had happened, according to this Facebook story, is this husband, he's a paramedic, he jumps into this river because there's a car that actually went into the river, and on top of this car is a woman, not his wife. There's a woman and her 10-year-old infant. So this paramedic jumps into the freezing water, swims across, and he realizes he can only take one back at a time. And so Stephanie says to this girl, who do you think he took first? And the teenage girl says, the baby. And Stephanie says, well, why do you think he took the baby first? Because the teenager replies, if he had taken the mother, then the baby could have drowned. And then Stephanie asks, do you think he did the right thing? Did he make the right choice? And the teenager says, of course. So Stephanie says to her, so it seems to me that you believe if someone is more needy, we should help them, not hurt them. If someone is more dependent, we should give them more assistance. Because she says, like, when you brought up that example, you take the fetus or the baby, you're right. The fetus is more dependent, of course. But doesn't that mean, just according to what you said, that we should help the more dependent person, not hurt them? And the teenage girl says to Stephanie, you argue well. So in a civilized society, we always help people who are disabled. In a moral society, we always give more help to people who need it. So that's why you notice that the parking spots for people with handicap are always closer to the door. We want those spots, but they get it because we want to help them. Same thing, you have ramps at entrances, the elevators. You have, for people with developmental disabilities, they've got financial assistance. So today is homily number 3. We're doing this 4-part series about life and abortion. And today's homily is about choice. So the first reading says today, if you choose, you can keep the commandments, and they will save you. If you trust in God, you too shall live. And to act faithfully is a matter of your own choice. The Lord has placed before you fire and water. Stretch out your hand for whichever you choose. Before each person are life and death, good and evil. And whichever one chooses, that shall be given. The word choice here appears 4 times because God gives us that incredible gift of free will. Now here's the thing about this reading. It's saying that some choices are good, some choices are bad. Some choices are right, some choices are wrong. And so right away, we hear in our society the phrase pro-choice. A lot of people are pro-choice. Now, logically, philosophically, that is incoherent because it's incomplete. Some choices are right, some choices are wrong. So this is what I say to some people. They say they're pro-choice, and I'll say, do you believe in the right to take? Do you believe in the right to take? And they'll say, take what? Do you believe in the right to take? And they'll say, take what? Good question. Do you believe in the right to take medicine? Sure. Do you believe in the right to take another person's life? No. Good. I agree. So, similarly, do you believe in the right to choose? Choose what? Do you believe in the right to choose medicine? Yes. Do you believe in the right to choose murder? No. So, if anyone ever says, I'm pro-choice, I believe in a woman's right to choose, logically, philosophically, mentally, you should go right to the next step. Choose what? She doesn't have a right to choose murder. Okay, so that's our first observation on today's first reading. Our second observation is that no one has to sin. You don't have to. The reading says, God has not commanded anyone to be wicked, and he has not given anyone permission to sin. Now, our culture loves excuses, right? We all like making excuses for why we do. Take lying. Lying is a wow. All of us make excuses and give reasons why we lie. Here's the thing, you don't have to. You could just always take the punishment. You don't have to swear. You don't have to eat too much. You don't have to look at pornography. We're not animals. We have free choice. And the reading says, if you trust in God, you too shall live. If we turn to God for help, He will give us the grace. We can do it. And in terms of abortion, you don't have to kill the baby. There's always adoption. There is always the possibility of making sacrifices. And for all of us, we all feel that pressure not to say anything to anyone about what we believe. You don't have to stay quiet. You can speak up. You can speak up calmly and respectfully. Third observation. Sometimes God calls us to be heroic, to do what is right even when it's really hard. The reading says, you can keep the commandments. The Lord has placed before you fire and water. Stretch out your hand for whichever you choose. Now, if you think about it, have you noticed that our culture has a problem with heroism? Like, if you think about the most popular stories that we watch, listen to, there's not a lot of heroes. James Bond, we've seen him for decades. He's not a hero. Can we be clear about that? Very popular series recently, The Sopranos, Game of Thrones, Breaking Bad. These are not heroic stories. So Jesus is telling us we can be heroic. We can live up to the standard of Jesus with His grace. Now, let's say that's too hard. We could at least try to live up to the standard of, let's say, Martin Luther King. Now, he believed in peaceful protest, not riots. And he suffered for that. Good for him. We could at least try to be like Jordan Peterson. Like, he tries never to lie. That's a good ideal, and he suffers for it. When it comes to abortion, it is true. Some people have said, you know what? My abortion helped me. I'm going to acknowledge that. That's what they say. So when it comes to choice, we hear that point of view. Could we hear the other point of view? Some people have said, you know, it was terrible for me. In our society, we hear that one side. Let's try to hear the other side of choice. So I'm going to show you a video right now just about the other side of choice.
I was 15 years old when I found out that I was pregnant. I was so scared to tell my parents because I didn't know how they were going to react or respond to the news. So I decided to hide my pregnancy from them for as long as possible. A friend's mom found out and decided that she needed to do the right thing and to share the news with my parents about my pregnancy. My life took a turn for the worst inside the walls of my home after my parents found out that I was pregnant. My dad seemed to take the news the hardest, and I saw him turn into somebody that I didn't even know anymore. My mom was torn between my dad wanting me to have an abortion and me fighting against that request. I wanted to keep my baby from the start, from the moment that I found out I was pregnant. It wasn't even an option inside of me to have an abortion. I knew that abortion was wrong even when I was a little girl. So I was very, very traumatized and devastated when my parents reacted the way that they did to my pregnancy. My dad was so broken and so upset that he actually threatened to take his own life if I didn't follow through with the abortion. I could not live with that, and so I adhered to their request, and we went to the nearest Planned Parenthood the next day. And it made me so upset that I began to cry, and my quiet tears turned into weeping and sobbing so loudly that my mom went up to the receptionist and asked if I could be seen early because I was creating a scene. And so I was taken back early. I was laid on a table where I was given an ultrasound, and I wasn't supposed to see the monitor that she was looking at, but I was able to turn my head in just the right position that I saw my baby. And in that moment, I just started to cry again because I knew that I could not follow through with this abortion, especially after seeing my baby on that screen. And the worker knew it too. She looked at me and she said, she was trying to console me with these words when she said that I was 8 weeks along, and she said, "That's very early." And I think that she was trying to encourage me that I wasn't as far along as I thought, but to me, I was farther along than I thought that I was. And I looked at her and I said, "I can't do this. I just can't have an abortion." And that following week, the pressure and the threats at home were even worse. And it got to the point again where this time I didn't have the strength to fight against the request. I was taken right back to the room where they performed the abortions, and I was strapped to a bed. I do remember that there were 2 workers in there at that time, and there was one on each side of me, and they were holding my hands, and the abortion doctor came in. He did not look at me. He did not speak to me. He simply performed the abortion and he left the room. When he performed the abortion, I remember hearing my baby being sucked out of my womb and into that machine that he turned on. And it was very, very painful. The tears were just streaming down my cheeks. The grieving process was very hard because I did it all by myself. I remember coming home and bleeding huge clots of blood that were larger than eggs and being really scared about that. And I remember being in a lot of pain with a lot of cramping, and I remember rocking back and forth on the floor to ease my pain and just crying and crying. But looking back, I started to struggle with self-confidence issues that I had never had before. I also struggled with anxiety and depression, and I lost a bunch of weight after my abortion. I just had no appetite anymore. I felt at times like I had no reason to live, and I had suicidal thoughts. And then when I was 28 years old, I started to really see my great need for healing, because it didn't matter how beautiful my life was with my family and my awesome children, and everything was great, but there was still this empty hole inside of me. And it took a few women at my church to approach me about my pain and to literally draw the truth out of me, to draw that deep, dark secret out of me about the abortion. And I did confess about my abortion, and that was my invitation to start to receive healing. And I'm so thankful for those women who were willing to approach me and willing to take the time to help me to surrender that secret, because I was then taken on a path of healing through post-abortive ministry and book study and counseling. And I sit here today and I can testify to you that I am healed from the pain of my abortion. And I just want women to know that there is hope and there is healing for you, just like there was for me.
So Serena's actually quite heroic. Even when she's 15, she knows what's right, and she was heroic to resist her parents' unjust pressure. And then so heroic for her to turn back to God. She knew that God loves her, because that takes a lot of strength, because there's so much temptation just to run away from God and not believe that he loves us. But she knows God does love us and God wants to forgive our sins. So God bless her. And then the courage to speak up, speak out against abortion and share her story. But when I hear that, I'm just thinking, It would have been great had there been heroic people in her life at that moment when she needed it. Not enough heroic people in her life. So this is why next week we're going to show those pictures of abortion, and we're going to show at least one video about it, because we have to do what's right. We've got to talk about the facts. This is what it does. We've done this for the past 2 years. And again, I'm giving the parents warning. Next week, if you don't want your kids to see it, at a certain part during the homily, I'll tell them you can just look down. So just want to give you that warning. This is also why we're going to do the 40 Days for Life Vigil. So we want to really pray for people who are going to BC Women's Hospital and they're thinking about abortion, they're going for it. We want to pray for them and love them and support them with prayer. This is also why we've given thousands of dollars to crisis pregnancy centers and these pro-life groups, just so that people know what can happen, the bad that can happen. So in terms of 40 Days for Life, if you're able to do one shift, we're starting Thursday, February 23rd, the day after Ash Wednesday. We're going to take 7 days, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. If you're able to hand out those cards next to you, just so that people can at least look at them in case they want to fill them out today, you've got this week and next week to do so. That'd be greatly appreciated. If you've taken one shift in the past, would you think about taking 2 or 3 shifts? For some of us, this is actually really easy, but for others among us, this would be really hard. And so we acknowledge that. It would take a lot of courage and heroism to do this. So whatever you're able to do, God bless you. Thank you in advance. I just want to finish with another story from Stephanie. So this time she's talking to another teenager, and his name is Mark. And Mark is really angry at Stephanie, and he says to her, well, what if you have a 12-year-old girl who has been raped by her father and is pregnant with a deformed fetus? And Stephanie starts thinking, what's behind this question? It's just the most terrible circumstances all wrapped into one. And she starts realizing, okay, Mark is asking, what if you have a 12-year-old girl and she's just in a horrible situation and the circumstances are just overwhelmingly bad. And so she says to Mark, I'm going to answer your question because it's a good question, and for some people, that is their life. But before I answer it, I'm just going to ask you a question. Bear with me because it has a purpose. And so she asks Mark, is there anyone in your life that inspires you, that you really admire? And he says a name. She doesn't know who it is. And turns out it's this championship wrestler. And Stephanie says, did this wrestler have to work really hard to get to where he is? Did he have to make sacrifices? He said yes. She keeps on pulling information out of him, and it turns out that this wrestler had a lot of tragedies in his life. A few of his family members had committed suicide. And in spite of that, this wrestler perseveres. And so Stephanie says, the reason why I asked you that is because you admire this wrestler, not because he didn't have any hard times. His life is full of tragedies, but he rose above it. He did the right thing. And she says to Mark, all I'm asking is that when it comes to crisis pregnancies, you just consider this. Just like that wrestler, that when we're in a total catastrophe, that we don't take a life, that we try to rise above it, that we try to do what's right, even when it's hard, and that we try to follow the example of the people who inspire us. And when Stephanie said that, Mark's demeanor changed. He stopped being angry with her, and he became warm to Stephanie. So there is always a choice to do what is good. Sometimes Jesus asks us to be heroic. Who do we want to be? Who do we want other people to be? With God's grace, we can choose the right thing, even when it's extremely hard.